Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 468th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Summer is upon us here in Phoenix, and it's hot. With more people getting skin cancer these days, I'm not willing to take chances with the sun anymore. Before I introduce today's podcast guest, I want to share with you how I stay cool and comfortable working in the summer heat. My number one strategy is wearing lightweight, breezy, sun-protective clothing, like cool, moisture-wicking shirts and hats that shade my head, ears, and the back of my neck. I've partnered with Gemplers.com to handpick my personal favorite sun protective wear, and you can see them at Gemplers.com/urban farm. That's Gemplers, GEMPLERS.com/urban farm. When you use the code UrbanFarm01, you get 20% off your first order. Heidi and I use these essential items on this list every day on the Urban Farm. Check them out and stay cool this summer. Today on our podcast, we have someone who is fascinated with an underappreciated vegetable. We're talking with Chris Smith about okra. Chris is a garden writer and homesteading consultant who serves on the board of the People's Seed. When he is not okra-ing, he can sometimes be found at Sow True Seed, an Asheville-based open-pollinated seed company. His book, The Whole Okra, a seed-to-stem celebration by our friends at Chelsea Green Publishing, has just been released and is available. Welcome to the show today, Chris. Are you ready to rock okra?
Very ready.
Excellent. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Yeah, for sure. I think pretty quickly your listeners will understand that I'm not American, and as an okra lover, they may be surprised that I'm not from the southeast of America, which is where most of the okra is eaten around here.
Right.
You know, I always get asked, how on earth did a British guy come to write a book on okra? And so that's maybe a good place to start.
Well, actually, my question would be, how does anybody come to write a book on okra? Because it is so obscure.
It is so obscure. You know, when you do a market analysis on books on okra, then you got a pretty open field.
Oh, that is the case.
But I did not choose okra because there was no book competition. That would not be true. It just was serendipitous that happened to be the case. So not much okra grown in England, a little bit too cool,
right.
And not much of an okra culture there. I had visited America in 2006 on an actual kayaking trip to the southeast. And I had this terrible, deep fried, oozy, greasy, nasty fried okra in a greasy spoon in Clayton, Georgia. And actually, it was another British friend, I think, was playing a trick on us. We were visiting him, and he pushed across this bowl of goo and kind of giggled and said, "You should try the local delicacy."
Okay.
So I don't think I'm alone there. If I'm speaking to a lot of people, you know, a lot of people have terrible first impressions when it comes to okra.
Yeah.
And you can definitely cook it badly.
I know I've done that.
You cooked it badly?
I've definitely cooked it badly.
Most people have had it cooked badly for other people. They're like, I had it at this place or I had it at that place.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's, you know, you can get it wrong for sure. But when you get it right, it's delicious. But it took some time for me to come back around to okra. I actually married my fiance is from Columbia, South Carolina, so I married a Southern girl. And at our bridal shower, a friend gave us a dried okra pod. And I'm a gardener and a seed saver, and so the story that came with these seeds that she gave us encased in the okra pod kind of weighed heavy on me. I was like, wow, these seeds have this deep history. They came from Rosamond, North Carolina, grown by a family farmer. And now they've been passed to me, and I felt quite a weight of responsibility around those seeds. I was like, if I plant these, then I'm the continuation of the story of those seeds, which is a pretty important thing to me and my connection with food. So I was very much compelled to grow these okra seeds, and it just gave me this whole new appreciation of okra, because suddenly it was my okra in my garden, and I was able to look up recipes and start digging into all the different aspects and uses of okra. And the more I dug, the more I realized okra is truly incredible and has got a pretty bad rap in this country.
Well, and the big reason it's got a bad rap is because so many of us have gotten a bad rap with it.
True, yeah. So my whole thing is it's kind of like a rebranding exercise for okra. Like, give okra a second try, have it done right, and realize that just because you've not cooked it well or it's not being cooked well for you, that's not okra's fault, that's our fault. So if we can change the ways we interact with okra, then it's got so much potential.
Oh, no kidding. So tell me something curious about okra.
One of my big things that I like to explore across all aspects of food is this idea of a seed to stem mentality. So it's kind of like tail to tip in the meat industry, but with plants.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to find, if you're a farmer, backyard gardeners, we put a lot of effort into growing food. It's no easy task. And to then only harvest and use a small percentage of that crop to then compost or throw away the rest seems kind of like criminal to me. So I'm like, well, if you can eat the leaves, or you can press the seeds for an oil, or you can eat the flowers, we should really be maximizing the harvests from these plants if they've got them to offer. And when you look at okra, it's like my champion crop of the seed to stem movement. It's like you can eat every single part of it, and the parts that are too fibrous to really ingest, even though they're technically edible, are used as like a high quality fiber. You can make paper from it. There's just, the whole plant is absolutely useful in some way, shape, or form.
Wow. And so you planted those original seeds.
Yeah, so Rosman, I started calling it Rosman Wedding, because it was from Rosman, North Carolina, and it was given to me as a wedding present. And so I still have those seeds going, but the reality is that's not the best okra out there in the world. Last year, I grew 76 different varieties of okra just to explore the vast varietal differences between them all.
76 varieties?
Yes. And that's just scratching the surface. But last year, 76 varieties. And when you think about varietal diversity, or my concern with having collected all these seeds and people sending me all these seeds was, they're just going to be different variations of Clemson spineless, which is the classic green okra, or red burgundy, which is the classic red. But truly, to walk into my variety trial was just to be stunned by the diversity out there. There was different sized plants, different shaped leaves, obviously all the colors from palest white through to deepest red, and the greens and the variations there. It was really stunning to see that each of those varieties was truly different.
Wow. You actually used the word okra culture, and I thought that kind of clicked into my brain. So let's talk about cultivation.
For sure, yes. One of the nice things about okra is that it's really quite easy to grow, and I'm often stunned by one of these complaints that I hear. It's funny, when you go around telling people you're writing a book about okra, it seems to be an open license for everyone to come up to you and say all the things that they hate about okra. Right. And I don't know what that is about, but so in terms of people that are growing okra, one of the complaints I hear all the time is I don't grow it because it's too productive. And as farmers, that seems to be the most ridiculous thing anybody could say. Like, you're not growing
right?
This plant because it's too productive. And I think what they mean, I kind of understand it to some extent. So when you're growing okra, it loves the heat, and it'll grow really fast if it's hot and wet at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's totally drought tolerant because it's got this crazy root network. It's got a super deep 4.5 foot taproot. It's got like 3 feet radius on all sides of this real dense lateral root network. So it's more than capable of surviving drought, but it'll be much more productive if it's got a decent water supply. And so once it starts podding, then those pods over time grow really fast, and after about 5 or 6 days, they start to become fibrous. So if you've not experienced okra before, then there's good pods when they're small and tender, and then they get longer and more fibrous, and a fibrous pod can totally ruin a dish. So when people talk about it being too productive, what they're talking about is they're not able to stay on top of the harvest, which, can be mitigated and managed in a few different ways. One is by harvesting the flowers, which maybe we'll talk about in a little bit, but the flowers are a really interesting and useful food crop. And so that's just a good way to slow down the pod production of the plant, because okra it has these perfect flowers. So it's not like a squash plant where you can, they're perfect as in they're beautiful, but they're perfect botanically as well.
Yeah.
So when you eat squash flowers, you're eating the male flowers and the female is still able to produce fruit. But when you eat an okra flower, you're sacrificing the pod production, which is a good way to combat that complaint of, oh my God, there's too much okra being grown on this plant.
Well, and, there's this level of abundance in nature that I always love addressing. One of the other things you said a little while ago is you said you could actually make oil from the seeds, okra oil. Have you done that?
Yeah, definitely. I guess it all fits into the whole. We got to shift the way we're looking at this plant. Is what I'm trying to get people to capture onto. If you're just saying all I want from this plant are these 3-inch to 4-inch long tender pods, and if I don't get that, I'm not very happy, then I can see why you're underappreciating okra. But if you start looking at all the different potential harvests at all the different points in the growth of the okra, then we're opening up this just like massive world of culinary potential. And one of those things are when the pods get big. So once those pods do go fibrous, most people are just like hitting themselves in the head, being annoyed with themselves that they've missed that pod. But I'm like, no, don't worry about it. You can either cut off that pod and then shell it like a green bean, and the immature seeds on the inside are these beautiful, tender little white seeds that they've got a pretty good protein content, kind of like an immature soybean, and you can cook them up. I have worked with a chef that turned them into like an Israeli-style couscous and that kind of thing.
Wow.
So those seeds are a good starting point if the pods have just gone slightly over. And then the cool thing with that chef, this is Chef Clark Barlow out of North Carolina. He harvests all those immature white seeds, and then he takes the external fibrous pod, dehydrates it, grinds it into a powder, and uses that as a cornstarch substitute because it's got a lot of flavor in it and it's got the thickening properties of the okra. So he can throw that into soups and stews and other things to thicken up the dish with an okra pod flour, effectively.
Wow. We've just missed out on this one.
You've missed out on this one. And I feel like America's missed out on this one. It took a British guy that knew nothing about okra to come across and just,
right?
Honestly, like a child, I've approached okra with wide-eyed innocence and no cultural stereotypes to hinder me. And there's so many cool things. So the oil that you asked about, after you've gone past that like green but fibrous stage, the pods will continue to mature. They can get quite big. I've got 16-inch pods, so pretty long pods.
Wow.
And they go brown and hard, woody, totally inedible at that stage. But the seeds inside them also go kind of rock hard. Like a mature, if you're doing a drying bean, then you wait for the pod to go brown and crispy, and then inside you've got the dried bean, which is botanically mature. You could plant it to grow more beans or more okra. But at that stage, the seed has this really interesting nutritional profile, which is pretty similar to soybeans, and you can do a whole bunch of crazy things with it. One is to press it for oil, and I have a small oil press. Edible oils are kind of like a side interest of mine. I feel like it runs parallel with an interest in seeds. You get a surplus of seeds, why not press some of them for oil? But the okra seed oil is kind of like an olive oil type. It's quite a light salad oil. It's very delicious. It's kind of hard to describe. There's kind of okra-y overtones to it once you get down to the flavor. So the oil is a pretty cool crop. And I used to give presentations and say, wouldn't it be awesome if we had an olive oil of the South? And then about 2 years after my first presentation, there's a guy called Clay Oliver who's won a fair few awards for his artisanal oils. He does a green peanut oil and a pecan oil. He started pressing okra seed oil, and now he sells it to high-end Southern chefs, and they love it. They can't get enough of it. So it's there's potential there, but the okra seed is about 150 years behind in terms of crop development for oilseed content. So the black-seeded sunflower has about 50% oil content, but the okra seed only has anywhere between 9 and 23% is the highest recorded one. So there's going to be some work to be done to get okra seed to catch up. The final product is worth it.
Right. To get it more oily.
Get it more oily, yeah. And maybe other considerations, if you're going to take on a breeding project, maybe the okra hull is really thick. So maybe a good okra oil seed would be thin-hulled, high oil content, high producing in seeds so that you can grow one plant and get a large volume of seeds. These sort of considerations would go into an oilseed breeding project.
Yeah. When we're going to talk seeds in a little while, because not only are you into okra, you're deep into seeds. So we'll get there in a minute. When it comes to cultivating, you just have some seeds, stick them in the ground. They pretty much grow on their own, even here in the desert.
I would imagine like I say, they love the heat. Once they're germinated, they'll grow quite happily and very quickly put out a decent root network. We're not in desert conditions in Western North Carolina, but I seeded my okra and then it didn't rain for 3 weeks. And it grew. It was totally happy. I didn't have any irrigation or anything. It was just bone dry and hot for 3 weeks. And yeah, the okra just, even in seedling form, didn't seem to mind. It didn't grow very quick, but it didn't mind. But it was doing this root thing, and as soon as it rained, I got real fast growth.
Nice.
So the other thing with the cultivation, I don't know what it's like in Arizona, but out here in the average summer garden, the tomatoes will be dying of one of 100 different types of disease, and vine borers will be killing all the squash, and cabbage worms will be eating all the brassicas, and all the greens will be bolting. It's just we're just holding on and hoping we can eat something at the end of the season.
Right.
But amid all that, the okra just keeps on growing. If you keep harvesting those pods, it'll just keep growing and flowering and podding and growing and flowering and podding. And while there's a few diseases that will get it, compared to every single other crop I grow in my garden, the okra just keeps on growing. It's truly phenomenal as a plant that's able to produce such a high amount of edible material with very little inputs and very little stress factors on it.
Yeah, that's my memory of it, is when I've grown it in the past, because I've been growing here at the urban farm for 30 seasons now. And when I have grown it, when it gets hot, it grows fast. And it produces, as you said earlier, a lot of pods.
Yeah, really, really a lot of pods. So if we're talking about some level of food security, then it would definitely be one to keep in your back pocket because, without much effort, you can grow a ton of food. And that's only when we're talking about the pods. All these other additional harvests that we can get off okra as well just makes it even more of a solid contender in that realm of food security.
Yeah. So harvesting, it seems to me when I've harvested them in the past, and this may be on the more mature pods, there's some spines on it, is there not?
Yeah. That's, you kind of just hit the nail on the second biggest complaint. One is it's too productive, which is a silly complaint, and the second one is that it's spiny and irritating, and that's a very valid complaint. It is. I did a test this last year, so I had all my 76 different varieties. I only had 6 plants of each variety, but that was still about 500 row feet of okra. And I wanted to truly experience what the okra itch was all about. And so I harvested my entire field with short sleeves and no gloves.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Towards the end of that harvest, I was like just basically running down the row, ignoring all the okra and like clenching my teeth like a rabid badger or something. And driving the 5 minutes home, my knuckles were white on my steering wheel. It was so incredibly intense that the okra itch is real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And what that basically is the pods and the leaves and sometimes the stem are covered in these trichomes, and those trichomes are like they're an irritant, and they're there really as a natural defense for the okra. Probably one of the reasons it's so resistant to a lot of the pests that we have. When they've done side-by-side studies and looked at trichome density on the leaves, then the plants with the highest trichome density are the more resistant to most of the pests out there. So it's not just us that don't like the okra itch, it's the pests too. So you've got to kind of take that into account and definitely wear gloves, definitely wear long sleeves, and just try. Most people out here harvest really early in the morning because, if you go out into the field at noon and it's 90 degrees out and you're wearing, like, you put your hood up on your hoodie and you've got your long sleeves on, your gloves, you're just sweating horribly so most people I know just get up super early. And that's what I was doing, and harvest before the sun comes up. And that's kind of bearable, but obviously not the most pleasant harvesting experience to be had.
The okra tingle, what did you call it?
The okra itch.
So did the okra itch, does that go into the kitchen with you once you've got the pods harvested?
It goes into the kitchen until they're cooked. So yes, but I guess when you look at seed varieties, so when you go out and buy some okra to grow, then there's a whole bunch of varieties that are described as spineless, and then there's some varieties that are described as velvet. And so what we see are three main pod characteristics, which persist to some extent. But so we have pods that still blatantly have spines on them, so they haven't had very good selection or breeding work to breed out the spines, and so they're still irritating until you cook them. And then as soon as you cook them, those spines go away. Then we have the spineless varieties, which are like super smooth to the touch. You can't tell, there's no hairiness on them at all, and you can eat them raw, and you can handle them without any problems at all, although the leaves of those varieties might still be irritating. And then the third category, and these were developed in the late 1800s, are the velvets. There's a red velvet, a green velvet, and a white velvet okra. And they actually still have the trichomes, but instead of being spiny, they kind of been bred into this kind of downy-like soft hair, I guess. You can kind of run your finger along them and they feel soft.
Oh, interesting.
And they're not irritating at all. And again, those hairs disappear as soon as you cook them.
Wow. And so let's talk about cooking and mitigating the slime, because I know that's an experience that I've had, is that, these pods are slimy. And what do you do with that?
Yeah, what you do with that? I'm going to encourage you and everybody else to be open-minded to the embracing of the slime. So that's one way you could go. You can go, okay, this is just slime. This is just like polysaccharides that are thick and gluey, and let's embrace the slime. And when we look at the origin of okra, it's most likely domesticated in Ethiopia, and we see a lot of okra culinary culture in Nigeria and then in West Africa, and there's a lot of really cool cuisine to pull from the African continent. And a lot of them, they embrace the slime. You read recipes, like Jessica Harris has a cookbook called the Africa Cookbook, and she just talks about mashing the pods into a gluey mass and then celebrating that slime by using it to mix in like scallions and corn and tomatoes and summer squash to make these like just self-adhesive patties that you can then shallow fry, and they're just phenomenally delicious. And that's embracing the slime.
Yeah.
So that's one route you could go. But I also appreciate that there's some dishes where you don't want like the gloop to be stringing off your spoon. And so when we look at that mucilage and how it works, then there's a few culinary tricks that can be applied. And if you've spent any time eating okra, then this should set off some like alarm bells in your head. You're like, oh, this all makes sense now. So acid will cut through the slime. So if you've ever had pickled okra, then the vinegar acid makes them a very low slime thing to eat. So you can have okra pods sitting in a jar of pickles for a year and they won't come out very slimy. If you were to put okra in water for like even a few hours, it'll just be dripping with slime. So that vinegar really cuts through the slime. And then across the entire okra eating world, we find dishes cropping up that pair okra and tomatoes. So okra and tomato stews, and all the gumbos often have tomatoes in, and the Indian dishes often have tomatoes and okra together. The Mediterranean dishes, the African dishes, all of them have these okra tomato combos, and the acidity of the tomatoes helps mitigate the slime. There's some cultures that will use orange juice or lime or lemon juice, all for the same reason, that pairing with something that's got a high acid content will cut through the slime. So that's one great way to go. The other way that we see used in the States is high heat. So if you deep fry your okra and serve it quickly, like fresh, then that high heat of the oil will cut through the slime, as opposed to boiling it in a soup or a gumbo where that sliminess is only exposed to 100 Celsius, and that's not hot enough to really cut through the slime. In fact, it kind of enhances it to some extent, and we use that mucilage to thicken the gumbo. It's kind of enjoyed at that stage. So yeah, you got to fall into one or two camps, or you can embrace both. You either embrace it or mitigate it, but both are good options.
Nice. So weird things about okra?
Weird things. Since we're on the topic of slime, we should take it one stage further. You can embrace the slime you can mitigate the slime, or you can extract the slime. So that idea of putting your sliced okra pods in water and just leaving it there and then straining off the pods basically leaves you with really, really thick water. I call it water with personality. But there's some evidence in Turkish culture that they use this to treat type 2 diabetes. At one of my presentations recently, I spoke to a lady came up to me and said her doctor told her to do this every single day. She drinks okra slime every day to lower her blood sugar levels as a treatment for type 2 diabetes. So there's a lot of, we already celebrate aloe as a real healthy thing to consume, and then things like chia seed and flaxseed, all these things with mucilaginous properties to them, we celebrate, but we don't celebrate it in okra. But okra has those similar compounds that can do similar things. So my wife and I were fond of making okra slime water last year and doing that. But I took it one stage further, and I have at the time she was 3 years old, I have a 3-year-old and a newborn, and I persuaded the 3-year-old and my wife to come to my experimental okra spa treatment. I had to promise foot massages, but basically I took okra pods, I boiled them in water, then I blended the okra pods with the water to make this thick green slime, and then I smeared it on their faces. And actually my 3-year-old ran off straight away and said, yuck. But my wife really wanted that foot massage, so she stayed there for the whole 10 minutes and then rinsed it off. And the idea was that it was a extremely hydrating face mask. And this was based on a reference I'd read from a Zimbabwean kind of cosmetic book where they have a very dry climate there. So this might work in Arizona. You can kick off a new cosmetic industry. But basically, the same idea of that mucilage, it's very hydrating. The okra is drought tolerant because it creates its own slime in effect. It doesn't dehydrate easily, and we can consume this for our insides to be a good internal moisturizing kind of cleanse, but you can also use it on your skin to rehydrate the skin. So I kind of played around with some of that. And in my book, I've got this awesome picture of my 3-year-old and my wife lying on the floor with green slime all over their face. And I cut out 2 slices of okra pods to put on their eyes. They look like cucumbers, but with okra pods.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cute.
Wow. You did have a lot to write about, didn't you?
I got carried away at times.
So tell me quickly about the book.
Yeah. So hopefully, just from this short chat so far, you get an idea that basically I fell in love with okra, and then I got carried away and just wanted to explore and experience everything I could in and around okra. And a lot of it, I have to tell people that there's very little in this book that I actually made up myself, in terms of just straight up creativity. Most of it, I did a lot of reading of 1800s newspaper articles and journals and agricultural texts from the 1800s, and there was a lot of research papers done more experimental in the early 1900s. So I just did a lot of reading around that, and so much information is out there that just inspired all these experiments. With just those I read the book of tempeh, and in that whole biblical book, there's one line that says, okra seeds could make a good tempeh, and that's all it says. And I can't find a reference to okra seed tempeh anywhere else in the world, but it just happens that Asheville has a tempeh company, and I went to them with a jar of okra seeds and said, hey, let's make some okra seed tempeh, and they did. And so we made okra seed tempeh with the local company. So there was a lot of that kind of thing. The book is full of kind of my research, but then building on with experiments and adventuring and ideas of the whole plant. It's called the Whole Okra, a seed to stem celebration. And it's just that we're celebrating the entire plant and exploring the use of the pods and the slime and the leaves and the flowers and the stalk and the seeds. And everything you want to know about okra is in this book. And probably lots of stuff that you don't want to know about okra.
Yeah, exactly. It is called The Whole Okra, a Seed to Stem Celebration by Chris Smith and published by our friends at Chelsea Green Publishing. So you're really into seeds. You volunteer at Sow True Seeds. You're on the board at the People's Seed, and you have the Utopian Seed Project that you've recently started. Give me a couple of minutes on your seed work, and then we'll have you come back and share in a whole other podcast about it.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, I'm employed at Sow True Seed. I'm the communications and marketing manager at Sow True Seed, which is awesome because I get to do a whole lot of the garden writing and the educational side of stuff, which I really enjoy. And then the People Seed is a wonderful organization that's very new in the Southeast. And they are basically saying, hey, look, we need more innovative seed breeding in the Southeast to make revitalize the industry so that we can have crops that are climate resilient and adapted and better nutrition and better flavor. And we need to shift the focus in plant breeding. So they're doing really good work there. Sow True Seed itself is an open-pollinated seed company. So we're all about seed saving. We really want people to have some level of seed sovereignty. So the knowledge and ability to save their own seeds for their own sustainable food systems. And then the Utopian Seed Project, there's a lot of seed things here. The Utopian Seed Project is kind of like a spin-off of Sow True Seed. So they let me step away from Sow True Seed and set up this nonprofit as the executive director. And it kind of was fun because it was born out of all the okra trials that I did last year. So those 76 varieties, I became a bit of an okra pusher. I went to all these local businesses and was like, hey, you should try making this, or you should do this, or hey, chef, you should try this. And so we had this whole community level exploration and experimentation around okra, and it was really energizing and fun, and people were talking about okra and getting excited about okra, and it was just really amazing. And that kind of became the base inspiration for this Utopian Seed Project, where we were like, hey, it's not just okra that has massive varietal diversity and untapped potential. It's pretty much every food crop. We've been narrowed into these monocultures, and we experience that through the supermarket system. Let's run in the other direction. Let's grow, 50 different varieties of corn, and then let's find out what's good about all those different varieties, and then let's find about what are all the traditional methods of preparing and making and eating and using corn. And we can do that for all the crops. So this year we have 8 different crop types in the ground, and we're kind of doing the same thing that we did with okra, but for all the different crops. So it's really exciting to kind of celebrate diversity in food and farming and explore the deep cultural roots behind that.
Wow. How cool is that? And are you familiar with Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Bill McDormand and Belle Starr are my partners on our Seed School Online program, and they're also the executive directors over at Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance. So
cool, right.
Yeah. I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you learned from it.
It's hard to pick one failure because kind of one of my personal things is that, failing is part of creativity. You learn that as a writer, you learn that as a gardener. But I was trying to work out, when did I learn that the first in my life? And I think this may not have been the first time, I'm sure I failed before this, but when I was about 15 or 16, I tried to canoe the entire Leeds to Liverpool canal, which links Liverpool, England to Leeds, England, and it's about 127 miles long. And I wanted to do it one go with no stopping within 48 hours. And there was a whole bunch of locks along the way where you had to drag your canoe around these locks, and it was just totally crazy. And I had 3 other people doing it with me, and it was just an epic failure. We got to the second night of paddling, and I was still a kid, and we were falling asleep as we were paddling and paddling into the wall, and it was just it was an epic failure.
Uh-huh.
The lesson from that is it doesn't matter if it was a failure because we failed trying to succeed at doing something. And I think that's what I've taken throughout my whole life. And maybe you can see that in the okra stuff. You've got to not fear that failing in order to try and do a whole bunch of different stuff. Because everybody else that doesn't even try to do things, they've already failed, right? They failed without even trying. And I would much prefer to fail trying to do something
right.
than just not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think that's why I failed at so many things, but also I got some successes behind me. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. Mom used to tell me when I was younger, Greg, you got to throw a lot of mud up on the wall to see what sticks.
There you go.
And
yeah,
the stuff
that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and the stuff that doesn't stick, it's, well, you could call that a failure, or you could call it a learning lesson.
Do you want to hear about something that sticks?
You talk about okra?
Kind of. This is one of my modern failures. So okra leaves. You can eat the okra leaves, real high protein content, all wonderful. I had this local Indian chef award-winning chef, Chef Marwan Irani, has a local Indian restaurant called Chai Pani, and he makes these kale leaf pakoras, which are delicious. But I was like, kale is a winter crop. You should try okra leaf pakoras as a summer crop, and it would be a really good balance in your menu. And he was like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Bring me some okra leaves. Brought him some okra leaves. I obviously know nothing about making okra pakoras at all. I just gave him a handful of these big old gnarly okra leaves, thinking that pakoras are deep fried, so there would be no problem with the spininess and irritation of these leaves because they're going to be plunged in hot oil. It turns out that when you make pakoras, then some of the leaves are exposed to the hot oil and some of the leaves are encased in the batter. And so when I checked back in on him like a week later, and was like, so how was the okra leaf pakoras? He was like, well, the flavor was good, but they were really sticky in my throat. And all the leaves that was captured in the batter would just maintain the horrible irritation effect. So we talk about the okra itch. I gave this award-winning chef okra itch in his throat.
Oh my gosh.
I felt pretty bad about that.
Well, and we learned, right?
We learned, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you consider your biggest success?
I'm very proud of what I did last year. I had a newborn baby. I wrote a book and I did this huge okra trial, and I have a full-time job. So last year was like, I'm most proud that I stayed sane and married, because it was kind of a crazy journey, and I came out of it the other end super happy with what I'd done. And the thing that I really learned from that, there's kind of like two competing okra proverbs. One of them is from Turkey, where they say, if you're not very happy in your family life, you should grow okra, which refers to the fact that you can spend a lot of time from your wife if you grow okra, because it takes so much time to harvest it all.
Uh-huh.
And so I experienced that last year. But then the other proverb is from Haiti, where they say a single finger can't eat okra, alluding to the fact that we are stronger in community when there's a whole group of us. And I really felt supported from my family, and 2 young children and my wife were very supportive in all the time that I took to take on this project and come out the other side. And then it was that whole project that led to the Utopian Seed project. And the Utopian Seed project is I really feel is going to change systems and improve food culture and really drive change, at least in our local region, if not through a replicable model across the rest of the US.
Nice. So what drives you?
I'm definitely driven by food. Like, I love eating really tasty things. And so we like to say at Sow True Seed that seed equals food. And so my passion is definitely seeds, but there's no way you can have that passion about seeds without having the passion about food. So, really working towards sustainable food systems, and I'm terrified about where we're going with our climate. And I feel like most of my decisions I make are in some ways to support a secure food system that's going to be resilient or regenerative in our climate future.
Beautifully said. If you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
I picked a book that kind of flows on from that drive. I really think everybody should read this book. It's actually a New York Times bestseller, and it's called Project Drawdown. And the subtitle really says what it's all about. It's the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And it's edited by Paul Hawken. So Project Drawdown is a much bigger organization that's really looking at clear and applicable ways to reverse global warming through carbon emissions. And this book is just it's a well laid out. It's very accessible. It's not like it's based in deep academic research, but it's not written in that way. It's very accessible. And I just think, if everyone were to read this book and just change a little bit about what they're doing in their own lives, then we might be able to, change the future for the better.
Yeah. Well, I actually have that book on my nightstand. I've been reading it. It is a good one.
I'm glad to hear it.
So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
I'm going to say that I would encourage everybody to approach their own personal food systems, whether you're growing it or eating it or supporting farmers or whatever you're doing to eat, because we all need to eat, to be open-minded, creative, and curious. And I think if people can apply that to their food systems, then it'll lead to better choices and better food and a better world.
Nice. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Chris.
No worries. It's been lots of fun.
How can our listeners find you?
Sow True Seed is the company that I currently work for most of the time, and they're online at sowtrueseed.com, and that's SOWTRUE But then the Utopian Seed Project is where I'm doing a lot of this exciting new work, and all the trials are going up online. And that's the utopianseedproject.org. And then I'm personally fairly active on Instagram, and my handle is at blue and yellow makes. And that's also the URL for my website, where I try and stay on top of putting up some blog information and links to my garden writing and that kind of thing. But I stay busy. But if you're interested in checking that out, then that's blueandyellowmakes.com.
And I'll bet there's a story there. We'll talk about that next time you're on. So we want to thank Chris and the folks over at Chelsea Green Publishing, as we have 3 copies of the Whole Okra, a seed to stem celebration that need a new home. And we're going to share them with you, our listeners. Email us at podcast@urbanfarm.org with the subject, I want to appreciate okra. Make sure to provide your name and mailing address. We will pick 3 random emails from the first 50 people who respond. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/okra. We are your urban farming resource. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and everywhere podcasts are found. Also visit urbanfarm.org to find articles, webinars, courses, and more. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.